So if you're not familiar with the film, I encourage you all to see it. It's a really fantastic film by the Québécois filmmaker Jean-Marc Vallée, who has gone on to make far inferior films like Dallas Buyers Club, about which the less said, the better. But Crazy is a really great film, in part because one of the central characters, or the central character in it, Zach, who is a young boy growing up in 1960s and 70s Quebec, who is struggling with his own kind of latent and not so latent queerness, finds in rock music, and particularly in Bowie, this, and funnily enough, I had scrawled down the same line that Andrew used, this portal of possibility. And one of the things I really love about this particular clip is that you can see that, as Zach is listening to Bowie's music, all of a sudden his dream life suddenly becomes less of kind of an idyllic fantasy than his real life, that through Bowie, he basically projects himself into this character, into Ziggy Stardust, into this world in which difference is not only possible and allowed, but desirable. So I guess, I wanted to start by saying, unlike many of the other people you will hear from today, I am not a massive Bowie fan or an expert. My own personal encounters began quite early through the inclusion of Fame on the Pretty Woman soundtrack. That was my first exposure to Bowie. I didn't actually know it was David Bowie. All I knew is that it was the insistent, kind of nasal, droning, mantra-like sound that was meant to represent kind of excess and, I don't know, the glitz and glamour of shopping on Rodeo Drive. I don't even know. But it wasn't until, for me, hearing the now kind of infamous cover of The Man Who Sold the World that Nirvana performed during the MTV Unplugged concert, and kind of connecting with the lyrics, this notion of self and selling out and repressed selves, and kind of hearing it in this acoustic way and going, oh wait, this isn't a Nirvana song. Oh, that's so weird. And then kind of understanding that Bowie had this whole history and represented this huge turning point in rock history that I didn't have to think about, because coming of age in the late 90s, he had already made being a misfit and being a freak and being flamboyant and being different and being queer a matter of fact, basically. My next encounter with Bowie, it's a living vicariously through. Happened sometime around 1997 when my friend Adam, who was our local dealer and the person who introduced us to the rave scene, he came to school one day and he was freaking out and he was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I said, what happened? He said, I was at a rave the other night and you're not gonna believe who tripped over my foot. And I was like, I don't know, who? And he was like, David Bowie! So at some point in 1997, when Bowie was on his Earthling tour, I assume, he had stopped in Toronto and he decided to go to a rave at which he tripped over my friend Adam's foot. And even then, I was kind of like, why are you so excited? This guy is like older than my parents, and he made kind of a middling drum and bass album. So, yeah. And as I've been reflecting on Bowie kind of in the wake of his death, and certainly in the years that have led up to it, with the release of The Next Day, which made me realize that, he wasn't, this isn't just a guy who was a legend in his time, who changed kind of the sound and the face, the literal face of rock and roll. This is a guy who who continued to remain relevant and who continued to outclass his peers. I started to kind of wonder why I had never really been, a Bowie fanatic, and I realized it occurred to me, and you can disagree if you want, because it's entirely possible that I just fabricated this to make myself feel better about this glaring hole in my musical background, that there are kind of, people can be divided into two groups. There are Lou Reed people, and there are David Bowie people. And for me, because I took being queer for granted. I came out at like 13 or 14 and said I was bi because it made more sense. And no one really flinched at that. And I think because of that ability to just kind of be and to understand that, being a misfit was part of the mainstream in many ways, I was really drawn to to Lou Reed's cynicism and flatness. And I didn't really grasp why it could be such a grand statement to keep reinventing yourself and to be so over the top. In my rush to prepare remarks for today, I started to think a lot as well about kind of the oft-quoted line that's come up a bunch, or I guess it's more of a fact that's come up a bunch in Bowie's obituaries in the past while, which is, that, around 1972, when he debuted the Starman single, On Top of the Pops, when he was kind of out there and over the top, kind of casually draping his arm around Mick Ronson's shoulder and understanding instinctively that he was making a gay gesture on broadcast television for the world to see. A lot of people have kind of championed the fact that in the UK, homosexuality was decriminalized only 5 years before. But one of the things that seems to be left out of this discussion is the fact that, even as the Sexual Offences Law was passed, Sexual Offences Act was passed, one of the MPs behind it had made a statement to the Times, and it kind of sticks with me because I think it puts some of Bowie's actions into sharper focus. He said, and I quote, "I ask those homosexuals to show their thanks by comporting themselves quietly and with dignity. Any form of ostentatious behavior now or in the future, or any form of public flaunting, would be utterly distasteful and make the sponsors of this bill regret that they had done what they had done," which is to say, mess about if you want. But we don't want to see it or hear about it, don't ask, don't tell. And when you think about that, when you think about the fact that, at this point in the early 70s, for all that we're talking about, being gay no longer being a crime in the UK, being outwardly, visibly different, and certainly being outwardly, visibly feminine or androgynous or queer was a huge statement, and certainly a huge one to be making in the mainstream, and one that can be read as an act of civil disobedience, particularly at a moment where flamboyant acts of being gay were still criminal gestures. My next encounter with Bowie, I would say, certainly one that stands out for me, came through the artist and local hero Will Munro, whose face you saw on Andrew's cover of Now magazine, which was a story I wrote, I don't even know, probably 15 years ago now? 2003, it's less than that. And for me, I think what Bowie represented to a lot of queers coming out and coming of age and understanding themselves in the 70s, Will created for us in Toronto by making a space in Vaseline that basically was, the physical embodiment of Bowie's performative ideology. It was a space where gender and sexual plurality, polymorphous perversity, a delight in being other, in outsiderdom, in freakishness, in costumes, and flamboyance, that was all kind of par for the course, and it was something where you felt like it didn't matter how weird you were celebrated for being that way. And I can still remember walking into Vaseline and seeing go-go dancers losing their minds to Rebel Rebel and thinking, oh my God, this is decades collapsing into one moment and generations of people coming together kind of in harmony. And through Will, I learned about Klaus Nomi, who, I don't know, I'm sure many people here are familiar with Klaus Nomi. Certainly Scott mentioned in his opening statements in 1979, Bowie quite famously used his platform to put this strange countertenor German opera singer on, primetime television through his performance on Saturday Night Live. I feel like in that moment, it was this consciousness of having access to a platform and using it to not only, be other, but elevate others who were so far outside the norm that they couldn't possibly imagine having that access. I think as well, in the wake of his death, and certainly in the half decade leading up to it, there were many times that I saw people referring to those who'd inherited the torch of David Bowie, who were kind of heirs apparent to his legacy. I remember very opportunistically Lady Gaga kind of taking this moment to talk about how she'd grown up in the shadow of Bowie and how she really felt like he was her hero. And I thought about how in her overweening desire for popularity, her hunger for mainstream acceptance, the self-consciousness of her performance and performativity, and her eagerness to ascribe to a Born This Way manifesto, so much of what she brought into the mainstream was kind of an anti-Bowie, a hollow simulacrum with little to no grasp of the meaning behind the man. Because when you think about Bowie, so many of the ways that he kind of embodied identity anticipated, the idea of identity as performance, of the mutability of self that we see in the theory of Judith Butler, of Foucault, of these discussions of kind of constructedness and the constructedness of gender. And I will close. Again, I'm very sorry about the kind of all over the placeness of my remarks, but there was a quote that I found in A Remembrance of Bowie by Carl Wilson that I thought was quite moving, and he wrote, "It's remarkable how long it took other male pop stars to go much beyond Bowie's use of such signifiers. Queerness slowly moved to the background of his narrative, even as it became a more prominent one in the mainstream. Yet Bowie remained a lifeline for every small town and suburban teen of uncertain tribe, anyone who might not yet be able to name the nature of his, her, or their outsiderness, an orange-maned, lightning bolt-faced stage of human development in his own right."